allowing me into your homes excuse me, for this 29th episode of Esoteric Science Roundtable. Today I would like to discuss the spiritual festivals. What are the spiritual festivals? Now, each religion, sect, or tribe has certain particular days that they hold sacred, and that these constitute the spiritual days that these particular groups would celebrate. And there are many different reasons why these particular dates stand out and were chosen or assigned special significance, and why these days stick out again outside of ordinary days, and why there's more of a sense of reverence during these particular times. And in almost every instance, there is an astrological tie-in to the date, and that is why initially why these days were attributed to these particular holidays, because of the astrological implications. And that has to do with, at all levels, relationships. We can look at that in the sense of the human relationships, and then within the kingdoms below the level of human, and also on up into even higher aspects of consciousness. And that these relationships do take place, do exist at all levels. There's interconnectedness, interrelationship, and most of the ancient people had a fuller understanding, a fuller awareness of the sacredness of the circumstances and the rhythms and the seasons and the cycles, and also the power that could be drawn from these particular times. And so again, they were very well aware of this. They took into consideration the winter solstice, the summer solstice. They celebrated the spring. Many different astrological alignings and different events factored into what the ancient people considered as an important day of worship or day to keep sacred. Now, also these holy days and these high holy days tie in to sacred places. And I did speak about this somewhat on my last show, as far as there being particular points on the globe, as well as particular points on each human body, that there are areas where there are different concentrations of energy, where there are different amalgamations, different points that, again, are in the human body or in other bodies as well, the planet, for instance. And that these points of power, these sacred points, or sacred places, if you're talking in the instance of the globe itself, that these points of power have special significance, and also in many instances these holidays were also held in specific areas, specific places. And so we find the correlation here. Basically, the ancients had a fuller understanding of this ability of transmission of energy, of the idea of energy and force, and how to work collectively with that energy, and how to tap into it, so to speak, and to, again, make use of it in their particular tribe, or their particular city, their group, their particular religious dispensation. And again, keeping in mind that these sacred holidays, these spiritual festivals, were established on astrological relations. That is probably where it would be best for us to begin to elaborate a bit. And certainly the celestial globes and the heavenly orbs exchange energies, and they intelligently transmit energies between planets, solar systems, and etc. on up. There's this interrelation and this exchange, again, between all conscious and, for that matter, all unconscious. Everything in manifestation basically has an exchange of energy. The level of awareness certainly factors in as to how intelligently and how aware each individual is, as far as knowing about the transmission of energy and knowing their part in this whole working. And so certainly, again, levels of consciousness below the human, which would include animal, plant, and mineral, only have limited awareness, as far as we can term it, from our human consciousness understanding. As far as the limited understanding that they have, the limited awareness that they have, but yet again, that does tie in because of this energy that I spoke of last week, the etheric body, which is an energy body that underlies the physical body, and how that ties in and is interrelated at all levels, below human and above human, and that we have in common with every living thing this energy, and that is part of this idea of spiritual festivals and sacred sites as well. Now again, considering the exchange of energy between different planets or between two people, for instance, certainly we can, in our own lives, think of an instance where maybe we meet someone and we have an instant attraction to them for whatever reason. We feel compelled to want to speak to them or to want to be around them or what have you. Or in other instances, the exact opposite would take place, and we feel somewhat repelled by a person for whatever reason, and we feel not inclined to want to be around them. And this exchange of magnetism, this exchange of force and energy, is also part and parcel of what takes place on a larger scale as far as the energy that exchanges itself between, again, the celestial globes and the heavenly orbs. Now, just in the sense that an intelligence occupies each physical vehicle, each person has a consciousness that indwells the physical vehicle, so too on larger scales does a planet, for instance, have an indwelling consciousness as well. And so we, as individual units of consciousness living on this planet, have a distinct and direct tie in with that consciousness that is the consciousness indwelling our planet. And that in turn ties us in with larger expanses of consciousness and larger avenues of awareness. Now, this energy does find its way to the physical plane and manifests as force, and that acts on life differently. And different planets are going to take in this energy and force and use it differently, because life differs from planet to planet, and that is going on the assumption, if you will, that there is life on other planets. But this energy and force does affect life differently. And even on our Earth, it's going to affect, again, largely due to awareness, the different kingdoms in nature. And so mineral kingdom will get a certain stimulation, the plant kingdom will receive a certain stimulation, animal, and then on up from there. And now once we become human, once we become self-conscious, then we can intelligently work with the energy that is part of this divine evolutionary plan, this plan of creative unfoldment that I've spoken of on several occasions on the show. Now again, it does affect the various kingdoms at varying levels, and we as humanity, being aware, self-conscious, sentient, and actively intelligent, are in a special place to be able to take advantage and opportunity of this relationship. And so again, we have the special role to fulfill in the creative laying out of the divine plan of evolutionary unfoldment. As time progresses, and as evolution carries us forward into closer proximity and a more integral working relationship, we assist in bringing into physical expression the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so at various times in our evolution, we have had the teachers or the avatars, the prophets, and the sages who have, in accordance with divine law, made their way into incarnation at some location, in some nation, at some significant stage, to fulfill some certain work. Now, we have many great examples throughout history, and certainly the main ones we would probably consider would be Christ, Buddha, Krishna, and all the movers that have led to the great religious dispensations. And certainly there are also lesser teachers, lesser prophets, and lesser sages that have also come in at different times to fulfill varying work that have complemented these greater teachers. And again, there are always lesser cycles and greater cycles, and they tend to work in conjunction with one another and to work off of one another. And so there is a larger, if you can step back and look at it on the whole thing more so, you can see how this whole working out and this laying out fits together, how there's, again, larger cycles, smaller cycles, but they all are interconnected and intertwined, and they're all like lesser cogs in a greater wheel that all serve their part in this great machinery that is the evolutionary surge forward, the divine evolutionary surge. Now, in some instances, a new religious ideology emerged through the writings of some of these great prophets, as in the case of Islam. In other cases, a new religion was originated by the followers of some great soul, such as Buddha or Christ. Buddha and Jesus Christ have no writings attributed to them personally, but the impact of their life caused those close to these individuals to preserve in some form the essence of their life expression, their teachings, and the new impulse they came to anchor and instill in the world. The massive numbers of followers of the various interpretations of the words of these two in particular, of Christ and Buddha, of these two divine sons, is ample evidence of the success of the impact of their messages. Buddha came to instill the quality of wisdom, and Christ came to anchor the quality of love. Now, sadly, men are still trying to make sense of the simple suggestion to love one another that was given to us over 2,000 years ago by Jesus through Christ. Excuse me. And the coming to earth of these great messengers has ties at our planetary level, but beyond that as well. Now, I spoke again last week of the etheric body, or the energy body that underlies and animates all things. And it connects us to higher expressions of consciousness and links us to all activity, all active expression. We all are, we're all part and parcel of that great moving, that great, that great forward surge in evolution by virtue of this energy body, that we are tied in, tapped in, and part of it, that underlies us at the very core of our being, really. And so again, we find cyclically that at varying times, certain events set themselves up, certain rhythmic circumstances set themselves up, and situations allow for the coming again of a world teacher, or a sage, a teacher, at some level to fulfill some quality that is lacking. And so they come into incarnation with some definite work in mind to fulfill. And certainly this is, in most instances, much greater than the individual that is coming forward to bring this new message. They are just the vessel. They are just the tool for implementing a new ideology, or in the instance of how that takes place in other areas, maybe the inventor of some new invention, some new technology. In that same sense, that would take place. But as far as the religious dispensation is concerned, again, certain circumstances set themselves up, and there are cycles that are more or less, that they're not exact. Again, like there's a cycle for Messiah, excuse me, which is 2,000 years, roughly speaking. That doesn't mean exactly at 2,000 years from the last advent of Messiah, which was obviously in Palestine with Jesus through Christ, that at 2,000 years from that date, that all of a sudden, a new birth of a new world teacher will take place. It's not as cut and dried and as exact as that. But relatively speaking, these cycles will manifest and fulfill themselves. Now, other things come into factor as well in all of this, and that is the crying out of humanity, the intelligent, in some instances, or the emotional reaction of humanity, of the masses of people. Now, all peoples from all religions at this time, and that's generally speaking, are looking for a world teacher. There is that prophetic message in each of the great world religions that they are looking for, again, a world teacher to appear rhythmically, cyclically, in accordance with divine law, but also according to according to the needs of the times. And that is part of what is considered as far as the reappearance of Christ, and also the other world teachers, or the idea of a world teacher, rather, that is expressed in other world religions. But to understand how all-pervasive Christ truly is, there is indeed a linking between Christianity and all of the other world religions. Certainly, there's a a weaving, a tapestry, if you will, that's woven together from all of these different cultures, all of these different dispensations that are blended together into the fabric of humanity and the fabric of belief and faith, and all of that ties into a united aspect of an approach to divinity, a divine approach, so that all religions do play their part. But in the future, man will be able to, by virtue of several things, be able to work more intelligently with this creative flow, with the idea that there is one underlying spiritual undercurrent that flows through all of the world's religions, that there is a living water, if you will, that underlies all of the world's religions. And if we could get past the seeming outer differences and the cultural differences, that we can find there is, in reality, much, much in common. The core essence of all religion is the same. And comparative religion will show us that if we bother to find examples of symbols from all of the great religions and put them side by side, we can see that the same myths underlie all the world's religions. And that's not to take away from any of the world's religions. They all have their proper place in the sun. They all have their need, even to this day. But as far as astrological events that are taking place, and as far as, in particular, the idea that we are moving from an age of devotion to an age of all-inclusiveness and synthesis, and I've spoken about that many times, as far as moving from an age of Pisces or an age of devotion into a more inclusive or synthetic ideology, and in which case that would affect each individual person in that they would not be so stuck in one religious ideology. They would not as easily turn their religious doctrines, their individual doctrines of all the great religions, into a dogma, into a rigid, crystallized set of beliefs that is unyielding and unwilling to look around and possibly see what the other religions have in common. And again, if people could only realize how much that Sri Krishna has in common with Christ, and that Christ has in common with Buddha, and also at another level, how much Jesus has in common with Muhammad. And there is much, much relation there, and again, an intertwining at the highest levels. All of these great messengers, all of these great divine messengers have all come at a particular time to fulfill a particular work and to, again, weave their particular dispensation, their particular ideology into this whole idea of a divine approach, a return to divinity, the idea of faith. Again, there is much interweaving, much of this that is the same if people could understand it. And that is part and parcel of our hope for the future, in that, again, the astrological age is going to influence men individually, to influence them more so to move away from an age of devotion into an age of all-inclusiveness. And again, respectful of already existing religions, already existing beliefs, but still able to include this all into one idea, one total idea, and that through these different separate ideologies, we can especially through these different ideologies find the one common thread that underlies them all, as I've spoken about. Now again, this part of what takes place when a new teacher comes along is an imposition of a new rhythm, and I've spoken about that phrase as well, imposing a new higher rhythm. And that doesn't necessarily negate the old rhythm, because again, as we see, there have been newer religions, but the old religions still have their place. They still have to go through their maturity cycle, and they all religions have a beginning, just like any life has. There's a livingness in all of the world's religions, as there has been from the beginning, and we find that they all, have their height and then their decline, and then a new rhythm comes into play. Now that's not an even cut thing to where one ends and the next one begins. There's also always overlapping to where as one begins to decline, the next one is becoming stronger, coming into activity. And so we find that being the case. And we can choose to work actively and intelligently with these different impulses, once we become aware of them, and once we understand, again, that there is a common thread underlying all of the great religions. And we also have, again, as I've emphasized many times, the quality, or the aspect of free will alive in all of us. And so that we do have choice. We do have choice as far as how we want to proceed in choosing any particular religious dispensation, or looking beyond our particular one religion, if we have one that's our one that we've chosen either through birth or through our own choice, and that we can again see this common thread. That's very important. That it would be very helpful that people would start to consider that more so. Now again, this an understanding more so of the whole divine picture and how things work from the macrocosm to the microcosm, from the largest levels down to our smaller levels here on the planetary scale, and how all that ties in. Once we understand, again, the exchanges of energy that take place, and that there is a consciousness behind all this exchange, that there is consciousness behind this activity of exchange of energy between all celestial bodies, and that we, as, again, sentient individuals, can take advantage of this, can work actively within all this, and play an intimate part if we so choose. Now again, to think about the work at varying levels, certainly as far as humanity is concerned, we're very much concerned with what takes place on the global level, on the planetary level, and what affects us immediately in that sense. But there is also, in a larger sense, the systemic, and just in the sense that man has a relation to the lower kingdoms, so it has a relation again to the higher kingdoms, and even kingdoms higher outside into the systemic and the cosmic levels as well. And so we can participate actively in certain cycles, and they're emerging more so that certain cycles are more readily, there's more energy more readily available at certain times of the year. And these three in particular that will be more so emphasized as time progresses will be the Aries full moon, or the celebration of Easter, and next would be the Taurus full moon, or Vesak, the festival of Buddha, and then lastly, which is upcoming very soon, which is actually this weekend, the Gemini full moon, or the festival of Christ. And that is why I wanted to, in particular, bring this discussion to light today, since upcoming on this weekend, this particular full moon, again, the Gemini full moon, there are many, many people around the world that are aware of the aspect of the cycles that we can intelligently work with. And so the cycle of the moon, from the new moon to the full moon, is one cycle that we can intelligently work with. It's one of many cycles that we can intelligently work with. And the moon and the lunar cycle have a lot in common with humanity. The lunar cycle from the phase of the moon is a 28-day cycle, and that does very much tie into our humanity. Now, we are tied emotionally, our emotional or our astral nature is tied intimately to the moon itself, to that body. Water is a symbol of our astral or our emotional nature, and so as the tides are moved by the moon, we, having water as 2/3 of the makeup of our body, are also affected by this, again, the cycles of the moon. We're affected by the waxing and the waning of the moon. And also, if we take into consideration the woman's cycle, the woman's menstrual cycle, it also is a 28-day cycle. And again, thinking of the aspect of the moon representing water, and water representing the emotional or the astral nature, we can see that that ties in. Our emotional nature links us to our heart and our heart center. And again, we're talking about a center. It's a concentrated point of energy existing either within a person's body, the globe itself, and that these centers are activated with this interplay of certain energies. And so, again, the moon in particular is connected to the heart center in humanity. And since Christ is the heart of love within the church invisible, or since he is the heart of love within the hierarchy, so-called, it also is another reason why Christ would choose to work with that particular energy, since, again, the moon does tie into our emotional or our astral nature, or the aspect of love, which, again, Christ came to anchor onto the physical plane. And so, again, that's part of why that work is carried out in that respect. Also, considering that the full moon, or any celestial orb or globe, is a reflector of energy at any given time. And we see that with the moon as well. The moon is basically is a corpse for all intents and purposes, but it still has its luminosity, it still has its reflective quality. And so as we work intelligently from the new moon, where there is no reflection that's apparent, and to the full moon, as that waxes and grows and that light is more so reflected until we have the time of the full moon. Again, this may sound a bit new agey or what have you, but this is in actuality a scientific process, and it will be more appreciated in the future as science embraces this ideology, and religion as well, and philosophy all come to a more of a solid meeting ground and have some respect for this understanding of cycles, seasons, and imposing of rhythms at any given time, and how it is possible for us to actively and intelligently work with these cycles should we so choose. It's entirely up to us as to how we choose to proceed. Certainly, many people from all over the world have a certain response kicking in, or trigger kicking in, that's making them feel as if there's something about this particular time is a little different than previous times. If something is going on right now that they can't quite put their finger on, but there are many people all over the world that have their finger on the pulse of something that they seem to be aware of. And again, that ties into what I spoke about with the etheric body, the energy body. That ties us into every other living thing. And so as waves of force come through and move through, again, we are electromagnetic by nature, so it does go from one person, like a wave, if you will, and it does find its way through all of humanity at some level. Certain more aware, more perceptive humanity are going to grasp any given force at a deeper level, and depending from there on, people will have the less evolved people, the less aware people will be less aware, obviously, of any kind of energy that's taking place at any given time. And so that being the case, the way that this transmission works through the varying kingdoms, if you will, is a transmission method in which this impulse, whatever this impulse may be at any given time, and considering that we're talking about the upcoming festival of Christ, the quality of love and the quality of goodwill in particular are what are being emphasized, and their active instilling among men, and their activity among men on the physical plane, and how this impression of love works itself into our consciousness. And again, it works itself down at a stepping down level, because it initially works from the will aspect of God into the church invisible, or the hierarchy, into Christ as the head of the hierarchy, and into a body of intelligent workers that are collectively known as the New Group of World Servers, which is not an organized group, but just basically people that are very aware of the plan of divine creation. And so they are able to actively and intelligently work at a much more aware level, and they have a greater perception of what's going on, and so they are able to work intelligently by virtue of that. They again are able to take this impression and step it down for the people of goodwill throughout the world, and then finally to physical plane centers, so that it can be distributed even more so throughout all of humanity, and so that every human can take advantage of that energy and that force as it's stepped down at some level. Even the most unaware person can at some level take advantage of that energy. And so as we choose to work intelligently, we can make use of that transmission process. And I've spoken before of the idea of invocation and evocation. And invocation is a calling down, and there can be an intelligent calling down. Certainly there can be a heartfelt calling down if we are just at ends and we are really feeling frustrated. We may cry out just from the very depths of our soul, the very depths of our heart, for some kind of relief or some kind of intervention, if you will, divine intervention, some kind of a salvaging. Or we can also work in a more intelligent fashion and think in a mental fashion and visualize and work in that respect to bring forth these impressions. And so as the impression is brought down, it kind of bakes, if you will, in the oven, and it's formulating and it's stewing, and then after that is established and after it's finished at that point, then it can actually be manifest into the physical plane. So basically, the idea has to impress itself at some level. If that's an idea of love, then it has to impress itself at some level in a person's consciousness, and then they can, in their own workings, in their own brain, in their own mind, work out this impression and what it means to them. And they, according to their individual skills, their individual capacities, will in turn take those plans that they've developed by virtue of this impression. They're impressed, and then then plans develop as a result of this impression, and then they can manifest on the physical plane. And that is how that working out takes place. Now again, the aspect of the moons are going to come into play more so and more so as science appreciates the transmission of energies, and religion respects this aspect more so and more so in the future. And again, the 3 full moons that in particular are going to have more emphasis for us because of the fact of the nature of the approach are going to be, again, the Aries full moon, the Taurus full moon, and the Gemini full moon. And in these particular times, Christ is going to have a much closer rapport, a much closer approach in each of these 3 instances with man than normally so. And the link between the Father, so-called, and the Son, or Christ, and humanity is there's a more established link during these particular times. And so this aspect of impression during this time, we can receive much more impression during this time, and so that we, in our turn, can work out and formulate plans from this impression and bring out some physical plane activity, some expression of the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so I would like, Chris, if you wouldn't mind preparing the Great Invocation, I'd like people, if you wouldn't mind helping out as far as considering in a visualization manner, in a visualization exercise, if we could consider the different possible, what may possibly come out of the return of Christ and the the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth and the reappearance of Christ. Now, I spoke again that this particular weekend is going to be a time that is celebrated by many people around the world, and this particular prayer, the Great Invocation, is used and emphasized, and that, again, there's a pool, if you will, of energy. Each person's individual thought works together collectively and amalgamates and makes one big thought form. And so worldwide, there is a thought form collectively that exists of what the kingdom of heaven is, what that entails, and what the potential ramifications, what's going to take place, what's going to change as a result of the reappearance of Christ actively working among men and working with the with the Church Invisible, or his intimate workers, the disciples, working actively among men in the affairs of men. Many people have an impression of what that may be like in their minds. They visualized it at some level. And so if I could ask those of you out there, and I know that there are many people out in the United States that have the proper quality. Numbers is important, quantity is important. If 2 or more agree upon something and ask, then certainly it's granted. Numbers are important, but quality, there is definitely a quality of individuals in this city that can add and contribute, if they so choose, to a successful implementation of using this type of prayer to bring forth the best possible results, to bring forth quality results, and to make a bigger amalgamation of energy, to make a greater, more effective amalgamation of energy, and to build a more effective thought form of what the kingdom of heaven established on earth, and more intimate relations between Christ and the church invisible. What does that entail? What does that hold for mankind? And Chris, if you would just go to the invocation now, I'd like to use that now. And if people would just visualize in their minds with me, please, if you don't mind. All energy that adds to this is helpful, and it's much more powerful than you might even imagine. If you would please have faith that this has an effect, and that we really can effect change and move through this prayer. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. And so, again, if we can concentrate on the energy of that particular prayer, that world prayer, it is the single most powerful prayer that I am aware of, and it really has only been available for humanity's general use for 50 years, thereabouts, relatively speaking. And so it has much power. It, again, relates, aligns, and links the humanity with the hierarchy, and then in turn with the will or the Father aspect. These three great centers, if you will, are in the process of a closer merging together, and the establishing of the so-called kingdom of heaven on earth would be a closer merging, a closer relation between these centers. And so there can be more intelligent cooperation on the physical plane, and that would be what most people consider the kingdom of heaven on earth. Now, in the same sense that these three centers link to one another, and that link is magnified and intensified and strengthened through a prayer like this, also there are centers in the human body that correlate to these three centers, and they are in particular the head, the heart, and the throat center. And I did speak previously about the so-called chakra centers or the energy centers. And these higher centers, do tie in and link us in a certain sense to these higher, or to these kingdoms of nature. And so the head center, the pineal and the pituitary gland, come together to make what was called the head centers. That aspect is tied to, obviously, the Father or the will aspect, and that tends to make sense if you can follow that analogy. The heart center, and that is in the heart aspect, that ties into Christ and the church invisible, or the love aspect. And active intelligence, or humanity, is tied into the throat center. And the throat is the creative center if we understand the aspect of the Word made flesh, the Logos, the Word, the creative aspect of sound, the creative aspect of the voice. Our voice, our throat, is our creative center on the human body, and that correlates, again, to humanity. Now, certain centers are open in certain people at different times, but one person has actively awake the head, the heart, and the throat. These three have an alignment and an interplay. They make a triangle of energy, just in the same sense that there's a triangle of energy between humanity, hierarchy, and the will aspect of God. There is a relation, and we can build in our own selves a relationship and a correspondence to the larger relationships. As above, so below. That is a famous saying, and that ties in to esoteric science very, very at the very core, so that we have these relations. Now, again, all of the cyclic impulse that leads to the coming of a world teacher or the coming of some prophet or some sage has its cyclic timing, has its periods when that takes place, but again, it also does tie into the needs of the time, the crying out of humanity, or the intelligent invocation of some aspect of divinity. mankind now is more intelligent than before in many respects, and and in particular, more so, the aspect of mind is more active now than ever before. That is what's important to keep in mind. The aspect of mind now is active as never before in history, and so that's how we can, with more power, more intensity, and more clarity, bring forth through our workings a vision of a more inclusive aspect, as far as understanding, again, unanimity of purpose between all of these great teachers throughout time, that they all have their own part to play to the whole, and that they all factor in, and that if men could have respect for the other religions as much as they have respect for their own individual religion, much progress could be made in that respect. Now, one of the benefits of having a live show is that we can discuss current events, and so I would like to incorporate something that does tie into this, but is a little bit off the beaten path to a certain degree, and is a little bit more political than metaphysical, but nonetheless, that being the case, if people would consider what's going on lately in the news, and that is basically, we're getting a lot of we're getting a lot more reports of the idea of the terrorist attack. Not a matter of if, but when. Now, that's the mantra they used before September 11th. They told us over and over again, and it has been hammered home. Not a terrorist attack, not a matter of if, but when. They're coming through that all over again. Now, that has a lot to do with the fact that public consciousness, and I spoke about this previously as well, public consciousness is coming to the point where people are aware of things, and things underneath are becoming more readily apparent to the average person. And so, that being the case, things are unraveling and unfolding much quicker than they would have in previous times. And so, the time factor that it took for general public to be aware of what took place with Oklahoma or Waco, for instance, it took some time. It took years, really, with the World Trade Center tower and people inquiring as to what really took place in that instance. That amount of time is much shorter. That has only taken us, relatively speaking, about 9 months. And we can see there is a hastening of consciousness, of understanding, and things cannot lie dormant and hidden in the respect that they used to be able to. Things are coming out more so and more so now. And you see this concentrated effort to spin the prior knowledge. All of these FBI memos that came out that, there was prior knowledge, that they knew what was going on to a certain degree, but they were too general, so we really couldn't act upon them, and so that's how this attack took place. So they're telling us now that we have Homeland Security in place, now that we have all of these new workings in place, implemented, to supposedly have this information sharing that's going to prevent these kind of attacks, and to allow us to be more aware, and allow the citizenry to be aware, and allow all levels to be aware. Supposedly, all these things are in place now, but yet, still we hear another terrorist attack. Not a matter of if, but when. It's inevitable. Now, certainly, even the dullest, most unaware person has to start thinking at a certain point, okay, wait a minute, we've given up our liberties for security, we've given up our rights, we've made the concessions so that we can protect ourselves, so that we can do what it takes to bring in added security, peace of mind, so that we can live secure lives in this country. We've done all these things, and we've so far gone along with this whole ideology. For them to implement all these things and then tell us on top of that we're still going to have a further attack, that we're still for sure going to be subjected to an even larger attack. Now, the head has been cut off of so-called Taliban and Al-Qaeda, supposedly. The leadership aspect is no longer functioning, supposedly. But yet they're still able to work at such a level internationally that they're able to still prop up a legitimate threat to our country in this incapacitated state. Now, how can that possibly be? How can it possibly be that these factions, as limited now as they are, and as disorganized apparently as they supposedly are, how can they still have this organizational facility at such a level that they're able to implement such a vast attack that's going to be carried out here in our country, on our soil, not a matter of if, but when, as Cheney would tell us and as so many would tell us. Now, how is it that this ragtag bunch is able to be so well organized that they're going to still carry out further attacks? If we have all this stuff in place, this Homeland Security and all of our intelligence feelers are working together finally, supposedly, then certainly we have to be on top of all of this activity, and we have to know what Al-Qaeda is planning and what's going on behind the scenes. And that begs the question, ultimately, who are the real terrorists? Now, right now, certainly we have, wrangling for position at the forefront, we have an information war and we have a war on terrorism. We have, in essence, enlightenment versus enfrightenment. Now, the plans are obviously unraveling for those that are planning these terrorist attacks because they're feeling obligated to now. First of all, they did a quick little spin on the FBI memos and what have you, and then they kicked that out of the mainstream as quickly as possible. So I don't think we're going to see much more, little pockets here and there, but an overall mainstream mass report on these FBI memos. That's going to fade from the scene, and in its place we're going to have more of this psychological conditioning that's going to keep us condition that, oh, there's going to be another attack coming down the pike. Get ready for it. Condition yourselves. Be prepared. Another attack's coming. I saw a gentleman on the news today speaking that it's very important now to psychologically condition the American people to be ready for attacks, for more attacks. Whether they happen or not is beside the point. It's the conditioning, the psychological conditioning that is very important to those behind the scenes. Again, openly admitting it on the news, just goes to show you how much there is going on that certain factions are aware of. Now, certainly, there cannot be this certainty of attack if we've already got all of these Homeland Security things in effect. I mean, how can that be? That does not make any sense. Then we really have really poor quality Homeland Security and all these other things, if that is indeed the case. So that's just some food for thought for public perusal to consider. Again, they're telling us, no matter how much security we give up, how many liberties we give up for perceived security, we're still going to get attacked. So why give up any? Why give up one single small liberty? Why give up anything if they can't provide security? Now, this gentleman was concerned that only 30% of the American people polled in a particular poll were worried that there was going to be future attacks. That concerned him very much. That's why he felt that the psychological conditioning to get people, on edge constantly is very important. Now, this distraction that keep people on edge all the time, to think that there's going to be some kind of terrorist attack at any given time, is counterproductive to a vision of the kingdom of heaven on earth and the establishment of goodwill and right human relations and the establishment of an active working on the physical plane between Christ and the church invisible and among men, among humanity, actively engaged and working together. This war on terrorism is distracting from the good, the true, and the beautiful that will manifest itself, but is being sidetracked and diverted by this dog and pony show, this war on terror, this unceasing, never-ending war that can be, anybody can be a terrorist at any given time. If they're going against the powers that be, anyone at any time can be perceived as a terrorist. We are all potential terrorists in this country and in the world right now, and so that is very much a distraction from what's really going on. So I would really encourage people to get focused on what's really going on, even though, yes, there may be a big attack. They're telling us there's going to be one. They obviously have knowledge. They're obviously going to implement one. It's pretty evident that they're talking about it in that respect. But don't be sidetracked by it. Think about what's really important if you so choose, and that is whatever is important to people. But anything besides thinking about this terrorist thing, and besides getting wrapped up with being conditioned to be afraid and fearful that, oh, this next attack is coming at any time and I have to live my life cautiously, we have to get past that kind of thinking. I say live your life as if you always lived it before any of these events. we have free will, and to live free is a very important thing that many people have died for, many people consider very important. So hopefully many people out there as well consider that it's just as important as myself and other people as well. I'd like to grab some calls and see what's going on. Hello, caller. Hello?
Hello.
I can barely hear you.
Hello?
I really having difficulty hearing you. Chris,
can you hear me?
Raise the aux send.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's better. Go ahead.
Are you a Christian?
Sure I am, but again, I've spoken on the show before. As far as what that term brings up in people's minds, I would rather consider myself a follower after Christ or an imitator of Christ more so than just label myself as a Christian. But nonetheless, what did you have a question about?
Have you ever seen the show, The Omega Code?
I've heard of it, but no, I don't think I have.
Well, it's a show. It has Casper Van Dien, Kathy Oxburn, and Michael Onsride. It relates to Jerusalem. And
is this a movie or is this a television series?
It's a movie.
Okay, no, I'm not familiar with it. Not that familiar with it anyway. I think I've heard of it. But what's the gist of the story?
Well, it's about this guy, and he sucks dick like you.
Okay. Thanks for that wonderful insight. It looks like I'm getting some of the more intelligent calls this evening. Thanks for holding all that time patiently just to tell me that. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing fine. The topic of your show right now is about the terrorism?
Well, I'm touching on that as a portion of this larger aspect. Basically, what I'm trying to discuss today is the so-called spiritual festivals, or the emphasis that is placed on certain dates as holy days.
Uh-huh.
And in particular, coming up this weekend, many people around the world are celebrating, again, this weekend, it's the full moon time during Gemini, as the Festival of Christ, or what's also known as World Goodwill. And so that being the case, I was hoping that I could get people aware of that fact and aware of how they can work to condition and qualify this reappearance of Christ. That we can play our part in that if we so choose by using the Great Invocation, which is a prayer, a world prayer that I'd be happy to send to anybody if they can provide me with some contact information. Absolutely free. I'd love to get this out to them. It's a powerful prayer and it has a lot of significance, especially right now. But I wanted to emphasize how we can work intelligently with divine creation, but how there are many distractions right now, and how the war on terrorism is very much a distraction that is keeping us away from, again, creating in our lives an expression of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and a more inclusive synthetic approach. Loving our fellow man as opposed to being distrustful of our fellow man, as we're being conditioned to, look out, your neighbor might be a terrorist, instead of embracing our fellow man. Hello? Okay, I guess I'll go on to another call. Hello, caller.
Oh, hello, sir. I just wanted to say, if you was to ask me what I thought about, that man that blowed up the Empire State Building over there in Detroit, I would look him right in the eye and tell him, we don't need any more of their kind.
Right, I understand. Okay, thank you for your call. Have a nice evening. Hello, caller.
Howdy, how you doing?
Good, yourself?
Good. I was reflecting on some of the things you said about this Homeland Security and some of those issues, and not that I'm an unfaithful viewer, but I was flipping over to Hardball, and they had Alan Dershowitz on. They were talking about setting up even a more secure, and they even characterized it as a secret police in the United States. And this is just incredible to me, and I'm sure you agree with that view, but it seems to me, and I've watched some of your shows. I don't watch it nearly as thoroughly as, say, Jeff Contreras, for instance, but there seems to be this idea that within the next 15 years, around 2012, 2015 period, we're going to come into an epoch, a full revolution of the galactic period, I guess you might say. It seems to me that it's not coincidental that all this clamping down on society, on free will, on our human rights, civil rights, is basically putting a damper, a baffle on those kind of attitudes within your average citizen. It just seems coincidental to me if in fact that you believe. Do you believe in fact that this cyclical galactic cycle is going to be supposedly an awakening of the American, another evolution in human beings? Is this what I'm hearing?
Yes, I do speak about that on occasion. And the 2012 is kind of a benchmark year. It's not like 2012 is going to hit and all of a sudden, well, bam, everybody's going to have instantaneous enlightenment. But it does portend a time when astrological events are going to be a little bit different, and we have that opportunity to take advantage of. But so many people are seeing right now that there's an opportunity. People are having a sense that something's going on, and they're wanting to enact upon it. They have a response to this at some level. So now they're having a responsibility at some level as well. You know, they're having a sense of responsibility. They need to act. They feel the need to act. And as far as with the Homeland Security, that's part and parcel of the awareness of those that wish to enslave us at the highest levels. And I'm talking even above human, if you will. There are those that work with humanity that in that area they wish to enslave us. They want to stifle our free will and stifle our creative divine expression that we have an opportunity to take advantage of now. And so they are working very, very diligently behind the scenes, and it's always behind the scenes with these guys. They're always shadow this, shadow that, black this, you know what I mean? That's their motive, to work behind the scenes to implement something that's going to keep them in power, and it's going to deflect the average man's ability to take advantage of what's coming down the pike, both astrologically and just as far as mankind is finally getting to the point where we're able to see eye to eye more so. There's more of a respect. Communication has changed, and different things have allowed us to know more about the world, know more about our fellow man, to be more aware of what's going on at any given time politically, you know, so people are more aware. And just like with the World Trade Center, the World Trade Organization and all these different demonstrations that take place, you see people more and more and more aware and getting together in large groups saying, hey, we want more of an expansion of consciousness, more of a fair shake, more access to the world's resources, more access to be able to be creative, joyful, happy people, you know, to be able to live a creative expression and not be stifled. And that's the whole key right now. I do thank you for your comments, but yes, I think that's what a lot of people down here at Access are aware of, and they're trying to, in their own level, bring out. And thank you, Chris, for putting up the other awareness shows, that phrase that you've coined recently. That's pretty appropriate, that these other folks down here as well they're aware. They're aware of these problems, and they're trying to, in their own level of understanding, bring something out for people so that people can, you know, use their own understanding to maybe have a fuller understanding and maybe find some way of practical expression. It's really up to each individual person out there viewing as to how they want to use any information that they may get through Access or any other source for that matter. It's up to people how they want to choose to proceed.
Okay,
I don't think I'm going to have time to grab the last call.
All right, thanks.
But thank you for your time. I do appreciate that. Okay, I do want to thank everybody for taking the time to view today. We are here every Tuesday live on Channel 10 from 8 to 9 p.m. I would like to encourage all of you folks out there to stay tuned for Chris Athanas and the Reality Expander TV show that's coming up next. I'd like to thank my producer Chris for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I would like to plug Jeff Contreras' Astrological meeting that he's having tomorrow at Opal Divines. It should be starting around 8 o'clock tomorrow. And I'd like to, again, thank everybody for viewing. And if people would please consider the Great Invocation and think about the approach of Christ and the approach of the Kingdom of Heaven to the physical plane and how we can intelligently and actively work in that respect. We can link up and work intelligently with this transmission if we so choose. Thanks, Austin. Have a nice evening.